A regional rematch for the national championship as Alabama and Georgia prove beyond a shadow of a doubt they are the best two teams in college football. While Georgia's been number one for most of the season, Alabama needed a late season push just to make the playoff. There were two unbeaten teams in all of college football when Alabama entered the SEC championship game, Georgia and Cincinnati. Bama beat them both in back-to-back games. Now, Nick Saban on the cusp of back-to-back national titles.
Preparation is going to be really, really important for us to go out there and be able to execute the way we need to be able to have any chance of success at all.
But Saban is in an unfamiliar role as an underdog, despite beating Georgia in the SEC championship game, and despite the fact that he has owned the Dogs for more than a decade. The Tide have won 7 straight in the series, including the national championship game 4 years ago. But Kirby Smart believes this year's team, and this game in particular, will be different.
We've worked really hard the last 30 days at getting better at us. So our guys are excited and looking forward to this opportunity on the biggest stage there is.
Will Georgia finally end its 41-year title drought, or will Alabama's reign continue? It's time to crown our national champion.
Welcome in CBS Sports HQ college football analyst and host of the Cover 3 podcast, Chip Patterson, here to break down some of the big storylines as we close in on kickoff on Monday night in Indy. Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young was sacked 7 times in the Iron Bowl. Then in the SEC Championship, Georgia's defense had 0 zippy sacks. What do the Dogs have to do differently this time around to disrupt Bryce Young in the Natty?
Well, number one, get him down. And it's not just a matter of what it could do for Bryce Young in terms of his confidence when he's in the pocket, but also what it does for Alabama in terms of getting them off schedule, getting them behind the chains, putting them in 3rd and long situations. Because there have been times for Bryce Young this season, whether it was against LSU, whether it was against Auburn in the Iron Bowl, the game that you mentioned right there, where those kinds of sacks and those kinds of negative plays created 3rd and longs that were much more difficult scenarios for Bryce Young to be able to go out there and convert. So on a very simple level, you got to get home. But I do think that there is another piece of this that is not just on the Georgia defensive front to try and get a hand and bring down Bryce Young, but it's also on the back half of that defense that Bryce Young absolutely carved up for 421 yards. They need to be better in the preparation going into the game, and they need to be better with their communication once they get in the game, because it did seem like there were a lot of players on the back end of that Georgia defense, in the secondary, in some of the weak side linebacker positions, where it seemed like they got lost. Or more specifically, Alabama receivers got lost, and they're sitting around looking at each other, shrugging shoulders. Whose responsibility was that? So we're going to need better preparation in terms of pass defense. We're going to need better execution and communication in terms of identifying what you're seeing and making sure that we've got our assignments down. But you started it at number one. You got to find a way to bring Bryce Young, who can be extremely elusive. You got to find a way to bring him to the turf.
Bryce Young set SEC championship records with 421 yards passing, 461 yards of total offense. Stetson Bennett IV tried to keep up, did not. Wasn't great, wasn't awful. What does Georgia need from Bennett in the national championship?
Play within yourself. Stop acting like being a game manager is a bad thing. You found so many new wrinkles within this offense, especially the way that Cook has been used in the passing game. Obviously, Bowers at the tight end position could end up being one of the most impactful players in the entire game for either team. So Stetson Bennett, stay within your game. Those easy seam passes to the tight end, finding those flares out there to James Cook, keeping things manageable. That is okay. You call him a game manager. Well, you know what a game manager doesn't do? He doesn't throw 2 interceptions. And honestly, Hakeem, there were 1 or 2 passes in that Alabama game that also probably could have been intercepted. We could have been talking about a 3-4 interception type game. And even in the Michigan game, he let a couple wild ones fly. And so for Stetson Bennett, I understand that your playmaking ability with your feet will be needed on 3rd down and maybe even in the red zone. But it is okay to be a game manager here, because those mistakes will absolutely crush you. The first 3 possessions of the second half of the SEC championship game, interception, turnover on downs, pick 6. Stetson Bennett, you cannot have those empty possessions like that. And it's really bad when they end, and it's your fault.
Could this perhaps come down to a battle between the offensive coordinators Todd Monken and Bill O'Brien?
certainly the chess match is on, but it's not just those two OCs against each other. It's going to be Bill O'Brien against Dan Lanning. It's going to be Todd Monken against Pete Golding. It's everything that they learned from looking at that first matchup. And what do you digest and what do you realize? And a big piece of this, John Mechie's absence. How does that change the way that Georgia plays? Does it make them feel more confident blitzing more? Does it make them feel more confident mixing up their looks since they're not concerned about John Mechie being out there? And if you're Bill O'Brien, the counter to these adjustments, or do you feel confident enough in some of the route running of these young wide receivers to be able to go out there and step up and maybe be a little bit of a surprise factor? There is so much information that is known between these two teams. The surprise factor is what I think is going to be really interesting to watch from all of the assistant coaches, especially the offensive coordinators.
Speaking of that, plenty of matchups to watch in this game. What's one matchup in particular you'll be watching for?
Alabama's offensive line against Georgia's defensive front. We've discussed it here in this segment. We will continue to say until kickoff that Georgia getting Bryce Young to the ground, getting him off his mark, making him uncomfortable has to happen. Alabama's going to do some scheme stuff to be able to avoid that quick passing game. Don't hold on to the ball too long. But Alabama also has that clock sped up even more as we've got injury issues along the offensive line. The Alabama offensive line has been questioned at times this season because of its performance. Well, they answered those questions with a really, really strong showing against Georgia. Nick Saban himself even said they answered that challenge. Well, that's great that they did that and showed that they can, but now they might be down one, maybe even two players that are key to that rotation. And if that is the case, or even if they play, you have to assume that they are limited in some way. Alabama's offensive line against Georgia's defensive front, and whether or not Bryce Young is brought to the ground, that could be one of the big factors that decides this national championship.
Yeah, Alabama's offensive line providing a clean pocket in the SEC title game, looking to repeat there and ultimately repeat as national champions. Big picture in terms of who wins the national championship on Monday. What's the best result for college football as a whole?
Interesting. Well, everyone seems bored with blowouts and everyone's all angry about bowl games not living up to their expectations. Like they don't watch 50 college football games every Saturday like I do. Hakeem, I'll tell you, we're operating at about the clip of good game to bad game if you look at an entire season's worth. But I think that Georgia winning a national championship would at least introduce a new wrinkle and a new character in a rivalry that some college football fans may feel like they're seeing over and over and over again. Hey, I've seen this movie before is a complaint that I hear from a lot of fans. But what if we've got a twist ending? So if you want to talk about what will engage a lot of casuals and normies, then yeah, Georgia winning in a close and classic game would absolutely deliver for those casual fans.
Is it a lost season for Georgia if they don't win the national championship?
No, the growth has been important, but it is without a doubt the kind of thing that you don't necessarily come back from because it's been the national championship game. It's been the SEC championship game the following year. It was the regular season game in 2020 and the SEC championship game this past season. Hakeem, those are 4 results where Georgia held a double-digit lead and blew it. If Georgia gets another double-digit lead, blows that double-digit lead to Alabama again, then there's going to be some real mental scarring that's going to be difficult. But I do think the way that that team dominated Michigan in the Orange Bowl has to be significant in terms of Kirby Smart continuing to have examples to give to his team about how you can perform and how you do perform at the highest level to compete for national championships. I don't think it would be a lost season because if Alabama beats Georgia and it's close and it's awesome and it comes down to the fact that Bryce Young is better than Stetson Bennett, that's not a lost season. It's disappointing you didn't have a better quarterback, but that just might be a Bryce Young thing. But for Georgia, there will be some mental scarring if the Bulldogs can't get it done.
Yeah, Kirby Smart looking to beat Nick Saban for the first time ever. Nick Saban 4-0 against Kirby Smart. Time now for the Geico 15-second statement. Chip, what's your prediction in the national championship?
It will be Alabama's young wide receivers that help deliver Nick Saban's 8th national championship. The absence of John Mechie has been something that we talk about a lot, and there's a lot of hand-wringing about it. But I will tell you what, there is tons of talent at the freshman and sophomore classes on that depth chart. Guys that are going to finally get an opportunity that I think could really stand out against a Georgia secondary that really wasn't challenged for much of the regular season. And in that SEC championship game, we saw the difference between Bryce Young and the Alabama passing attack and all the other passing attacks that Georgia had to face through the year. About 9 or 10 of the 11 Georgia starters are probably going on to the NFL. But there's a duck or two out there that I think that Bill O'Brien and Bryce Young are going to find and try to pick on. And that's where I'm looking at somebody like Ja'Cory Brooks. That's where I'm looking like somebody Javon Brown. That's where I'm looking at somebody like maybe even JoJo Earl, who was banged up a little bit later in the season, but they've been trying to work back to health. There are freshmen and sophomores on this roster that my colleague on the Cover 3 podcast, Bud Elliott, has been talking about since they were in camps as sophomores and juniors. These dudes are for real. They are future pros who are going to be coming up as the next class of Crimson Tide elite wide receivers. I wouldn't be surprised if they stand up in John Mechie's absence and help provide the winning pieces for Alabama.
Alabama looking to become the first team to repeat in the college football playoff era, while Georgia looking for its first national title since the 1980 season. Chip Patterson breaking down some of the big storylines ahead of the national championship. Chip, thanks. For all things college football, check out the Cover 3 podcast. Host Chip Patterson joined by Tom Fornelli, Danny Cannell, Bud Elliott as they take you from National Signing Day to the National Championship with in-depth analysis. Every week during the season, you'll get picks against the spread. Loyal listeners will tell you it's one of the best podcasts on the market, the Cover 3 podcast. Download and subscribe today.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.